Hello, everyone. Welcome. So my name is Nicole Rademacher, and I am founder and director of Acogedor. And thank you for coming to Invisibility's session 4. Today we have 4 transracial adoptees that will be talking about race and gender, identity, and trauma. We have James Straker, Marie Gardam, Babby Lecbear, and Kayla Tange. I'd like to invite each of you to briefly talk about who you are and your relationship to the topics that we'll be talking about today. Let's start with Kayla.
Hello, my name is Kayla, and I am an artist. And thank you for inviting me to have these conversations. I think that I've been, I guess, trying to figure out and find the language for invisibilities that I've felt. So through this journey, I somehow landed on performance and adopting various characters to perform under. And yeah, the last 15 years, I felt like that was somehow the truest form of expression that I had to have some of these discussions. So yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone else has to say about these subjects.
Thanks, Kayla. Marie, would you like to share a little bit about yourself?
Hi, yeah, I am transracial adoptee born in Malaysia, but not Malaysian. So I'm Chinese Indian. And so I'm still untangling what it means to be Malaysian if I'm not ethnically Malaysian nor culturally, because I wasn't raised there either. And I think being mixed race, I think that has its own invisibility about it too, that I don't, I look in the mirror, I still get confused looking for those parts of myself, the Chinese and Indian parts of myself. And that I feel like is reflected in the world when I move around the world. People are having to ask me questions about my how I identify around that. I think from the invisibility that really comes to mind, first of all, is both biologically and racially, adoptees feel set up for invisibility around those two things. So if I think about, biologically, it just feels like no one mentioned my first family growing up. No one ever, not even on a birthday did anyone ever mention them. And they're not fully realized people, and they gradually just sunk away to invisibility. And then race, from a race perspective, I feel like in 2016, I had this moment where I realized just how erased my identity had been from that perspective, when racialized conversations around politics started happening, and family are saying things like, but we don't think of you that way when it comes to me identifying as an Asian immigrant. And my closest friend married a Chinese man, and in conversation with her, I realized she'd completely forgotten I'm Chinese. And then, if I identified as Asian in conversation with friends, they'd say, but you're British. So there's all these layers that I suddenly saw of ways in which my identity was erased from other people's perspective, not from my own. But it gradually made me realize I hadn't got a clear connection myself, and I wasn't showing up in the world in that clear identity way as well from a race perspective. So I feel like race and racism can be invisible to white people, even if they're close to you, even if they're family members, and biology and biological connection can be invisible to not adopted people as well.
Thank you, Marie. James?
All right, thank you, everybody. My name is James Straker, and I'm 52 years old. I was adopted from South Korea when I was between 5 and 6 years old in 1975, and raised in a white my parents were white. Our family ended up having 9 kids in my family. 5 of us were adopted, some domestically, and some, I also have siblings adopted from Korea. We weren't biological siblings, but we were all adopted through Holt International. In terms of the topic today, really it's taken me a long time to even be able to tie the two, like how is adoption connected to being invisible, but I agree with Marie that a lot of things have come to a head. It was a really traumatic time, like the whole Donald Trump presidency. I think in Europe it was the Brexit. It was the sort of like, there were all these rise of white sort of nationalistic sentiments and anti-immigrant sentiments, and I honestly, I agree. It was the fact that a lot of these sort of sentiments were located way too close to home for comfort that was really a tipping point for me, and just realizing how much I think in adoption, people are starting to understand more of the original trauma of relinquishment. But I think that there's still not enough understanding of, in addition to that, on top of that, dealing with that, there's the continuing trauma, an ongoing. That's why, I think it's a complex trauma of constantly being disenfranchised, invalidated, almost, like our story told to us, erased, and, marginalized, and force-fed this identity that who would want that? Who would want who would want that? And so a lot of my writing, a lot of my personal healing, a lot of my conversations have really been centering around these structures of erasure, and really seeing that they're nothing new, that this is really the template, of colonialism, of imperialism, of cultural imperialism, of really the forces that have shaped what we call history. So seeing those two, for me, finally being able to name this experience of erasure, it allows me to understand who I am, who I am more. It allows me to feel more stable in saying this is who I am, because I know this is what I have experienced. So for me, it's really important for me to continue to sort of really come to grips with that. It's a painful truth to have to realize that this is, because we grow up wanting to believe everything that we hear about adoption, and we want, we kind of grow up conditioned to want to believe that, and it is sort of a loss when you have to come to grips with that, and you have to realize, okay, if it isn't this, then what is it? And here we are now looking for what it is. And so really thankful for other adoptees, because boy, just nobody understands the journey like you do and we do. So thank you so much.
Thanks, James. And Badley?
Hey, I'm Badley. I was adopted at birth in 1978 by a provisionally white or aspirationally white Jewish family. I'm a European and Native American descent myself. And so I think the best way that I can approach the idea of invisibility as an adoptee is that as somebody who is white passing enough when it's convenient, sometimes it's convenient for me to be white for people, and sometimes it's not. And people tend to decide what race they want to treat me as on the basis of that. And I didn't really realize this until I was like in high school. And so I've always moved in and out of racial communities, of my religious community, and also of gendered communities particularly. And so a friend of mine describes me as a professional code switcher. So I like to think that my whole life is defined by simultaneously never quite being anything, but also able to be anywhere. That simultaneously, like, myself is oftentimes like obliterated or invisible to people. And at the same time, I'm like able to be like radically present, and have been able to be radically present in communities that are radically that are way different from my own experience as a person. So it's a very double-edged sword. I oftentimes feel invisible in conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion at my institution where I work, for example, because there are people who think of me as like a radically aggressive decolonial Native American educator, and there are other people who think of me as like a white dude who works in their office. And I'm not that latter thing on any given day. I've never been that thing. And so, you know, I feel like it gives you a unique perspective on the arbitrariness of racial categorizations, of gendered categorizations, of national and ethnic categorizations that frankly people who you know live in the entire context of their birth family, often in the nation they were born in the city they were born in, would never see. And that's where I stand. Thank you.
Thanks, Badley. Thank you, everyone, for giving us kind of a brief idea of who you are and where your experience is. Before we go further, I want to do just a quick grounding exercise because we're going to be talking more about trauma and how that's affected us. So if you can find a comfortable sitting position, or for those of you tuning in, you can lie down. And if you feel comfortable, close your eyes. We're just going to do 3 short breaths. And we're going to do in through your nose for 4, hold for 4, and then out through your mouth for 8. So in through your nose, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, out through your mouth, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In through your nose, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, and out through your mouth, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And lastly, in through your nose, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, and out through your mouth, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. When you're ready, you can open your eyes. I'm excited. It looks like everyone has found the chat on YouTube. So please, yes, feel free to make remarks or ask questions. Know that the chat is a little bit behind. So if you ask a question, give us a second to respond to it. But everybody is in agreement and everybody is definitely feeling the same as all of you have felt as you've been introducing yourselves. To start out the conversation, something we talked about in our prep meeting was the performance of us as adoptees. And so I want to put that out there of who would like to kind of talk about their experience as a performer. There's 2, Badley and Kayla are also performance artists. And then, so their experience as a performer, as an artist, or your experience as an adoptee, or both, and anyone can respond.
I'd like to, I guess, attempt my current feelings about this. Something that actually came up while Badley was just speaking was perpetual fraud for me, and feeling like, yeah, just like judging my constant performative actions in public, or yeah, so I forgot to give a little bit of my background. I was adopted from South Korea by Japanese American parents who were born in the internment camps. And so I felt like not watching my adopted parents perform to be less Japanese and assimilate into American culture for safety reasons. I feel like I adopted a lot of those kind of performance tactics, but I don't think I really understood that until I was an adult. So I think about this like idea of just performing as an adoptee and then performing for different institutions in the world, and how it's confusing. And I think we did talk about this a little bit in the initial meeting about needing a lot of alone time to kind of recalibrate. Because I'm personally not an extrovert, even though I'm a performance artist. So I do feel like it's it takes extra energy to then perform on top of performing. So I feel like retreating is necessary.
I think also as a performance artist, or I mean, yeah, like it comes naturally in a certain sense that you're, like a lot of things that like think like I never like went to. I have a really really good friend who's a tremendously talented performer, and she went to like drama school, and her parents work in the movie industry, and like I have a lot of friends who are like that. I never did anything like that, and the idea of performance from a non-authentic place that like say a theater actor trains to be in is weird to me. But the idea of performance from a really authentic place, like a place of like deep personal fear or something, is like totally like, yeah, I can perform this out of fear. And I think about this in particular because like as somebody who's in my work, when I work as a male, I work in male drag. So I sometimes perform 40 hours a week, if not 60 hours a week. And the emotional exhaustion of that is insane. And I don't know if somebody who isn't traumatized in the way that an adoptee is, or somebody who's like, I don't know if you could do that if you didn't have complex PTSD, and like in relationship to that or other things. And I think that's something that I think about a lot, thinking about also about not being enough or imposter syndrome. I work with like I have a both a neurological disorder that makes it hard for me to recognize myself visually, and I also have extreme gender dysmorphia and body dysmorphia. So I avoid mirrors of any kind, which is weird because I'm performing into a mirror right now because that's how Zoom works, which is always terrifying. That's my job now. I'm not quite aware of what I work at. And I think to myself as somebody who's often white passing, and like it feels like I know other Native American people who are also white passing or like, lightly skinned or something like that. And like they really go for it in terms of like a lot of like native signifying visually all of the time, like stuff that looks pretty corny to me, right? And that's their thing. I mean, that's how they want to be in relationship to their culture. But then I sometimes feel like as somebody who will be misidentified as white by people, then I'll be looking in a mirror and I'll realize like I'll see my profile and be like, no white person has that nose. Like no white person has ever had that profile. Like I have like the forehead and nose of something off of like a bas relief in like Tenochtitlan or something like that, right? Like, but I'm doubting, and I'm still doubting like where I'm from because because I don't have, because I didn't come up on the res or something like that, and I'm not dark. I've been thinking about this a lot lately because I've been looking at a lot of historical photos of this relates to Native people, and I don't know any Native people who look like Native people look like in the 19th century. Even I know very few Native people who look, there's a term that comes up in the African diaspora and also in the Native diaspora, which is rape-colored skin. That like like we no longer even maintain our bone structure or our skin at this point, like all of us, including people who are in the community, and that's really that's another layer.
I think for me, one of the big things that it was an eye opener And certainly something that, shifts your view in a way that you have to respond, was, really talking with other adoptees. And it was, a lot of it was, and I think I shared this in our prep meeting, but it was just so powerful and it will stay with me forever. It was just a group of adoptees in a little small focus group off of a bigger group on a, group discussion. And the question was, how comfortable have you been throughout your life, telling your story? And how has that been? How has that been for you? And, so many people shared, and but there was a woman that she shared. She said she couldn't even answer in the framework that the question was given, because talking about comfort and sharing her story, because she said, well, I haven't even been able to share my story yet, because for all my life, my story has been told to me. And that really, it just penetrated me to the core of really what the adoptee experience in essence comes down to. Is we're mandated, we're expected behavior, attitudes, norms. We're expected to not do things, and we have our cues. When this happens, and within my family, I can certainly say, when mom did this, all the kids were supposed to do this. It was like the cue, and so it really just struck me that adoptee experience is very, very performative. It's it's the whys behind the performance, though. Why force people to do these things? Why the lack of awareness around it? And yet, when the structures are so real too, still very profound to me. And so I really look to like adoptees that are also performers. I think Shakespeare was on all of us are performers to some sense. Shakespeare, that's certainly not a new idea, but within the context of adoption, it just takes on a whole new, so many other levels that really do need to be discussed and aired out and opened and then talked and really, really see the light of day. What's going on here for real?
I really resonated what Badly said about professional code switching. I really feel that. And my growing up was because my father was in the Air Force. We moved around every few years, so there's another element there of reinvention every time we move. The opportunity to reinvent around what works, what gets me, what gets me a better life, however I reinvent myself. But what I really feel like thinking about this idea of performance is adoption, or being an adoptee, feels like an extreme sport in immersive theater. Like everybody is playing some role that we are just co-opted into. It's not just us as adoptees, but my parents, friends, strangers, they're all going to tell this story. They all know the story of as if born to, or be grateful, or blood doesn't really matter. There are all these stories that are out there that everybody knows. And we're co-opted into it, and we're just kind of following around, taking our lead from the adults and the other kids to a degree when we're growing up, until we have that moment where we think, hey, wait, this doesn't work very well. And it's just the strangest thing that we're forced into it, and that people aren't really thinking. They are in this role. They're just playing the role. They're not really thinking, how would I feel if my child was taken from me? What does unmarried mother really mean? Does it really mean that she didn't have a boyfriend and a loving partner? Or, there's no thinking going on, because everybody is co-opted into this role that we don't have to. It's shorthand for get on with it.
I'm curious, since the professional code switching seems to be the best way to describe this feeling, but I was curious to how all of you deal with that, because I feel like it builds up and builds pressure and then ends up kind of coming to a head where it becomes a little bit unbearable. Is there other ways besides retreating that I don't know, any of you kind of manage, I guess, this pressure around this, these performative acts?
I think, Kayla, I remember our last talk and how we talked about how, well, you were talking about how you go through these seasons of engagement in adoptee community. You'll be out there, then all of a sudden, oh my God, I got to come back to myself. And it's the same thing. It's the same thing to me here. It's like, the performance will never end. Like the demands for performance will never end. They will never end. Marie, you talked about how we're all just sort of going around and taking our cues, and that's the perfect. I study sociology, and that's the perfect definition of social conditioning, right? Is that we're just sort of taking our cues and we're learning from society. But what's really coming to be really clear now is that it's almost that language of social conditioning it's inadequate, really, because it just sort of it makes it sound very much like a sort of like a natural selection, all part of a natural thing that happens in society. But in our modern societies, we understand that we have a word for that. It's called social engineering. When there's a specific agenda behind the social conditioning, and a lot of times we think of social engineering in terms of like cyber crimes or trying to change people's behavior so that they give up their private information. Social engineering really is the best definition of social conditioning, because it really, there is someone at the end of the levers that are trying to condition people. So we all have all these scripts that we're following, and it's never going to go away. I really believe that, and I think we can alleviate it. We can raise awareness, but I mean, not in my lifetime. I don't see this going away. These demands, I don't see a lot of these things going away. So a lot of it's just, how can I be the most authentic? And Kaylee, like how we talked about, we just retreat to nature, we retreat to ourselves, we do our things. I mean, we just, wherever we find our authenticity, like in nature, I just feel the most like myself, honestly. I just feel like it's something that I don't experience anywhere else. I just wonder if that, I know you're looking for a concrete thing, like maybe during the conversation. I'll have to think about that more.
I feel, definitely nature and retreat are definitely on my top hit list, and I feel like one of the things that's difficult for us, I think this is universal for us, is trust. And that's partly where the performance comes in, because we don't really trust anyone with our authentic self. But for me, just leaning in a little bit, and even without the trust, practicing it with people who are safe, people who can validate my feelings. So those relationships where people have, maybe with a little work from me really explaining myself, which I've been able to do in the last few years since I've really had some thought about my experience, those people who've come with me on a journey and can have learned to validate my experience and sit with it and explore it with me and be curious and can allow me to cry if I need to. Those people, that does nourish me. And then there's the other extreme, which is certain relationships, the performance is heightened in certain relationships with my parents, for example. If I have to spend some time with my parents, then that's going to drain me quickly. It's going to take an hour for me to be done. And the reverse is people who can validate and see some version of me that feels more real.
I think there's a lot of advantages to being trapped in a world of perpetually performing. I'm only able to have a relationship with my adoptive mother. My adoptive father died about 18 years ago, because she knows me in a limited context. She's never met anybody. She's met one person in the past 20 something years of my romantic life that I was dating, and that was an accident, briefly. And there's reasons for that. And I think that's insane to most people. That's like literally out of it. Like your parents haven't met the person you're dating, and like, no, I would never allow that. If I had children, I would never allow them to meet. So it's like, it allows you to have a very weirdly compartmented life, and that can be advantageous. If I wasn't able to perform like that, I wouldn't be able to have a relationship. Would be too combative. It would be too combative, and it's combative enough as it is. And the same thing with my work. If I know what kind of, like, my people who know me in the real world know who I am. If my students had to encounter me as who I actually am, it might be more difficult for them to learn from me. And as somebody who does a lot of decolonial work as a professor and has to think about, well, how do you actually get the horse to drink that you've taken to water? Right. That's what I have to think about. That's the hard part of my job, is not just being like, I can tell you these amazing things and like, you're going to know them now. It's like, how do I get you to drink from the same water? And it's like, if in the persona that I, which is more about gender than anything else, the persona that I wear at work, because it puts me in a position of a certain kind of authority, it allows me to use that authority for them, and I think that's, I think that allows me to sometimes be like radically naked at my job in a certain kind of way, and at the same time radically clothed. Like, this is the truth about being a professor or a real teacher, is that you're at the end of a process, your students see you naked. They know all of your flaws. They know your limitations. They know when you're bullshitting. They know your weaknesses, and just like theirs. And the worst teachers I've ever met have been people who think that the students don't see this. And so I think that, like, it's weird. It's a trick. I mean, it's a bit of a trick, and I don't know how other people. I'm probably doing it wrong, like, right? But it's the only way I know how to do things. Yeah, it's the only way. I don't know how to do it any other way. And again, like when you said, like, trust is a big thing. It when it comes to the navigating with employers and people you work with. My boss, I have two bosses, and one of them, I've worked with these people very closely for 5 years. She's an adoptive mother, and she finds it very difficult when I refer to my adoptive mother as my adoptive mother. And I, like, to the point where it's, she's very sensitive about it, and I try not to mention it, because I don't know what she's dealing with her daughter, but it's complicated, and she's at least smart enough to realize that. But yeah, but I don't want it. But it makes it more complicated for me and her.
I guess, yeah, and that is that what you're saying there, that they have purposes. Like, obviously, if we're doing them, there must be a reason. There's a reason for the things that we're doing. I guess the thing is like, if you feel empowered in your performance, like you're in control of it, like maybe it's different. Whereas if you're feeling sort of like compelled, and it feels totally inauthentic, I guess that's sort of where the bind that I experienced in my experience with family and stuff. But I certainly see that it can be very empowering to perform, and we all do it. We all do it. I mean, part of being human.
Yeah, I think this idea of kind of shape shifting is it's always interesting. Just when I've had professors that I've had meetings and said, I'm kind of like suffering right now, like I have a lot going on personally, and just kind of letting I am figuring out a way to like get through this material. And I've been met, you know, not just from professors, but even like bosses. Like I had no idea. You always just seem really upbeat, and wow, that's shocking to me that you know, have had mental health, you know, struggles, and then this and that was going on. And in my head, I'm like, wow, I've fooled more people yet again. It's almost like, but I can't even turn it off, because I'm always like thinking about not trying to not make other people uncomfortable, with a lot of the dark thoughts that I might have, because so then I kind of noticed, because you know, I feel like you're always kind of like having this like out of body experience. And I don't know if you all can relate, but sometimes I'm literally looking outside of my body at myself having a conversation with other people, and I'm like, you know, oh wow, like you're doing it again, you know, you're really concerned with how the other person's going to take, you know, handle all this darkness. Let's, you know, deflect with some humor and, you know, make some sarcastic joke about, you know, the existential crisis you're going through. And I noticed that that's like this tactic that just like, even when I tell myself, okay, you're not going to go in like this, you're just going to be 100% honest. It's like I can't even help but censor myself in these ways that I find a little bit disturbing as an adult that it's still happening. But I don't know if any of you have those kinds of internal thoughts.
Yeah, that really resonates with me, the idea that people are surprised, you know, when I suddenly have an emotion or really reveal an emotion or some kind of not doing well. And the bit, I don't know if you guys have seen the Paul Sunderland video. So yeah, that was the bit that resonated the most. He's a professor who, or I don't know, a therapist who deals with addiction a lot. And he noticed a lot of adoptees coming through his clinic, and so started to kind of really pay an interest in this. And one of the things he noticed was that when adoptees were being tested for depression, the high rates, you know, normally people scoring as highly as adoptees would be, you know, would look like they were in a complete mess. Whereas adoptees present as being kind of like, yeah, everything's cool, you know, but their scores are showing they're off the charts in stress levels and depression levels. Yeah, it really resonates for me, because people just don't, until I'm actually revealing, and I'm increasingly talkative about my feelings. But yeah, I think there's a lot of surprise for us coming out of the fog. There's a lot of people kind of going, but I thought everything was fine, you know, and you see that so much when we're having these conversations in the world of social media. I know an adoptee and they're fine, you know, this can't be true, you know. I feel like we all know, yeah, I was that adoptee that you're talking about. Yeah.
So when I was in grad school, I had this incredibly toxic, there's 2 chairs in my program. They were presumably lovers as well. And the male was extremely like just dangerously toxic kind of rabbinical figure. And the day we met, he said something to me. He was courting me. I was being courted for this program. My adoption came up and he said, I could be your father. Not I'm old enough to be your father, but like I could be, like, as a joke, because I don't know who my biological father is. And so he went there. Now this is a man who studied with Lenny Bruce. This is a man who studied with Friz Freleng and Mel Blanc. This guy had taught the history of humor in medieval and Western society for 30 years. This is the perfect professor for me to work with. This guy is the real deal, but he's still totally fucked up, right? And then the first conversation we had later, after I was like seduced by him and his partner into this program, the first real conversation we had, he took me aside and he asked me about being an adoptee and suicide. And addiction is a related topic. Because he, as a man who's in his 70s, has multiple friends who are also in their, say, 50s to 80s, who had adult children who were adoptees, who had all killed themselves after a long bout with drug addiction. It was one of the most interesting things that anyone's, I mean, you know, you get asked a lot of weird questions when you're an adoptee. Like, I'm from the generation that grew up seeing Annie. My partner and I were joking about this the other day. So I'm just old enough that when people found out I was adopted at school, they asked me how long I lived in the orphanage, because their concept of adoption was based on the movie Annie. That's kind of cute, you know, right? But it's also not cute. But like, this person who was an experienced adult person with a whole life had observed this in all of his friends. And that was what he wanted to know about. That was what he was one of the few times he ever asked me a question about anything. And under the year and a half we worked together, you know, was adoption, like suicide, depression, addiction. Are these things all connected? And all I could say was like, duh, like, yeah. And I think one way of looking at it is that, like, human beings are a social animal. We're not ourselves as individuals. That's a delusion that is created by our minds. And if we all went into the woods, even if you had all the gear and all the skills, you would literally fucking lose your mind eventually as alone. We are designed to live in groups. Now, you can talk all day long about what those groups are shaped like, what families look like, and stuff like that. We all have strong opinions on that. But adoptees are like people who are like the boy raised by wolves or something, except we live in a city. We live amongst other human beings. And I think that's one way of looking at like why adoptees like function as like highly functional, like chronically depressed people, or whatever we function as a body. You know, we're like, it's like being raised by wolves, only like we're not with wolves. The wolves are people, right? And you know, and I think that's it's our normal. So if you were born in the woods, for example, and raised by wolves, you wouldn't necessarily be insane. It would be your normal. You wouldn't lose that sense of society, right? That we would all lose the longer we went off into our personal world and pond or whatever, right? But we're like, we're never gonna get that. So we're just gonna be wolves.
And I think that point about where human beings are social, I think from an identity perspective, I feel like identity is relational, and we haven't quite come to terms with that. As a society, will, you know, I have friends who will just say, you know, you can just be Chinese or be Indian if you want to, but it really does rely on people kind of agreeing with you. I can't just decide I'm a peacock and be a peacock, you know. Somebody has to kind of validate that for me, and groups have to somehow welcome me into the group and acknowledge that it really is relational. No matter how rebellious and independent I am, you know, it still relies on there being some cooperation and validation from other people. I do think identity is a relational piece.
I want to acknowledge some of the conversation that's going on in the chat. So people are really feeling represented with all of you and what you're saying. And we also have Sin Twisted that has been talking about their is it 13 years free from method addiction, 2 years free from self-harm, and a survivor of suicide. And I want to recognize Sin for the hard work, and also for bringing that to us today, and sharing that with the community. I think that, you know, we're all working through these things, and I put the link to the video for Peter Sunderland, so we can see how that works and what kind of get, if you guys aren't familiar with the video, where that relationship is with us as adoptees, and how everything's kind of intertwined. Let's see what else. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Sin. I think going off what you were saying, Maria, about just needing some validation, outside validation to validate who you are. I think my sister and I would joke a lot about, walking by mirrors. I know Badly was, discussing just, looking in the mirror and just having, when people would point out that, oh, you're Asian, or, oh, you're so this for an Asian person, or, et cetera, et cetera. And it's always like, oh, for a Korean girl, or for this. And my response would be like, wait, I'm Asian? As a joke. And that was not met with a lot of laughs, but still, like what are we supposed to, how are we supposed to respond when other people are blatantly pointing these things out that obviously, we are faced with daily, this like confusing idea of this kind of like dissonance between what we're seeing and how we're actually feeling inside.
Does anyone else have that kind of racial dysmorphia when they look in the mirror? That sort of, I really don't know how I'm seeing in the world. I can't tell when I look at myself what I'm seeing, really. Yeah.
I've learned to measure people sometimes by it in a way. I don't know how to explain it, but like Native Americans have a different definition of how race functions and nationality, how race and nationality function than non-Native people, non-Indigenous people, right? That's just the truth. So like when I'm in a Native community, I'm being evaluated racially in a way that has very little to do with my physical appearance, right? But when I'm being evaluated by, you say, like settler colonials or white people, I'm being evaluated in a way that has everything to do with my physical appearance. And this has come up. I mean, I got in an argument with somebody, with an artist who's, he's bitter. Let's just say that and he identified me. He called me, he's like, this guy came, he's also from the Harbor area. We've known each other for like 20 something years. And he's like, and he called me white. And I'm like, and I was like, and this dude's like definitely Mexican, right? And identifies as like Chicano and Mexican in that tradition. He's also therefore indigenous too. And I'm like, no, I'm white passing. And this guy, I know him, he's square, right? Like he's from like a rougher community than I came from, but he's like square. He was like a kid in a cute t-shirt. And I was like hanging out with like gang members who dealt meth and occasionally killed people in high school, right? Like I'm actually hard in that way, right? Like I've been hard in that way, in the way that he's never been hard, even though he's from a harder place. So I'm aware of all these intersectionalities, but I was so fucking pissed off with this. And I literally turned up like all of Latin. I turned up like every Latin gangster piece of like, where I'm from, like all of that kind of stuff with him. And it's so annoying because like, we base so much on skin color too. And so somebody who's like lighter skin now than I say was as a child or something like that, right? Like I still have shovel teeth. I still have filial folds, I still have various secondary racial characteristics besides skin color that are going to prevent me from getting a job, right? All kinds of shit like that. And that was really aggressive. That was struck me as an extremely white thing to do, like an extremely colonial thing to do, to want to create that barrier, and I was like ready to fight. I was like ready to fight over that. I never get that attitude from people in an actual indigenous community. I've never had that experience. I've never had it's weird. Like it's weird for me. Like the first time you crawl into a sweat lodge and you realize no one is looking at you like you might not be native. Right. I think I can discuss this, but like the last time I was at a sweat lodge, like one of the women who was hosting is a sun dancer. And I thought she was white. visually I thought she was white. And that's one of the most revered positions a person can have in North American Native community. You know, I just think it's the dysmorphia is like the sense of looking in the mirror and like not trusting it is so crazy real. Yeah.
And I think this brings us in, and this is something that I experienced and something that I'm having a real hard time communicating to my adoptive family about the harm that happens to us when we're growing up in these white, and it really does center around this colorblind theology, you know, or you know, colorblind theory, not theology, I apologize. But you know, I don't see color, I just see you. It's problematic. It's because I am, you know, at that time I was an Asian boy. You know, there's nothing wrong with seeing an Asian boy for who he is, an Asian boy. You know, and it comes on the heels. So you know, this whole I don't see color, and now, you know, we see a lot of people, you know, and we see, you know, anti-racist being called out as racist, and it's just, you know, it's the whole all lives matter, you know, calling out Black Lives Matter as the racist, and it's all based on that colorblind theory is what justifies it to them. You know, God doesn't see color. Well, then why did God make us all these different colors then? If he doesn't see color, you know? The proof is in, you know, not that I believe in a God per se anymore, but it's just these all the sensibilities that they use to justify these things fly in the face of lived realities, you know, and what makes it the most just really, it's one thing to be gaslit about your racial identity, sort of being, you know, I know my adoptive mom, you know, I tried to broach the subject, and this is what, so it was, you know, she told me, well, I don't feel like we really raised you to be white. And I had to sort of disengage from the conversation because I could feel my blood starting to boil, because all I had to do was pull up a piece of paper that says Franklin County, Columbus, Ohio, and say, well, what's this paper all about that says that I was born to you and that I was born to white adoptive parents on this day in this town? What's that all about? That, you know, so, you know, it's the mixed messages. I don't see color. I'm not raising you to be white, but I did raise you to be raised Jimmy Straker, because Park Ming-yu wasn't white. Let's face it. So when you change my name to be Jimmy Straker, you raised me to be white. I mean, come on. So, so it's just that. It's just a little bit of disingenuousness with really understanding the totality of the experience. And it's beyond blaming. I'm not here to blame my parents for that. I'm just saying, hey, this is something that's going on, and we should look at it, you know. But the worst part of it to me is that the fact that we even have an identity, a racial identity, you know, it's something that we want to celebrate now. That we definitely, I mean, I can feel for myself and for many adoptees that I've spoken with, we want to celebrate who we are, our racial identities, because it was something that was made to feel invisible, that was made to feel less than. It was the source of our othering. It was the source of our narrative burden that never ends. Every time I go to Applebee's with my dad, it's like narrative burden, the waitress is going to say, and so what's going on here? You know, in her polite, you know, the country style way, you know, or charming way, you know, but it's going to be there no matter what. It's always going to be there, that narrative burden, that kind of stuff. But the worst part of all is the fact that we want to celebrate our identities. And it's the white supremacist culture that says, no, you're the racist because you're identifying yourself as Asian and you're elevating your Asianness over your humanness. And that's not what God wants. It's the gaslighting of this. You know what I'm saying? And it's the calling out of it. It's saying that people's reclaiming of their racial identities and celebrating of that, and they're living their lives as racially embodied people, is a form of racism, when in fact it's just a form of empowerment to bring ourselves back to our authentic selves, because we were told for so long that we were less than and that we were other. And so just in light of the historical realities, the things that they're saying to justify it just doesn't hold water for me. It doesn't hold water when policymakers say it, and it doesn't hold water when my aunt or uncle or my mom or dad or my cousin or my sister says it. Like, it doesn't, you know.
In terms of like not just racial identity, but having an overlapping and separate racial and ethnic identities, I had this terrifying experience on the first day of the Trump presidency where I was threatened by a census worker with arrest because I was a randomly selected household. So yes, this took place on I came home from like the Women's March or whatever we were doing on that day to be threatened with arrest on my porch, because he was like trying to track me down to participate in this thing. And this has happened to me a number of times where when I have to go and put my race and ethnic data into a form, there isn't enough room. Like the computer system is not set up to accept the quantity of data that I would check. So genetically, supposedly, I'm English, Scottish, French, Native, and Mexican. When I was a child, and this is again getting to what we were just talking about, my parents told me I was English, French, Scottish, Native American, and Spanish, which is a clear way of saying white people think being a little Native is legitimizing. This is a very complex issue. Lots of white people want to tell you they're Cherokee. White people who are like very white passing and have no Native culture will often they identify with a very like a tribe you've all heard the name of, right? You know, like they're like a tribe that you heard of on TV in a Western, right? You know, or something like that. Like there's a way we mythologize ourselves, or let's mythologize to them, right? And that's a very complex issue. But Spanish is better than Mexican, right? The white people will agree on that, you know. And those of us who are Latin in any kind of way, I exist in communities where I know people who are like aggressively Spanish, even though like I can tell you're not exactly all Spanish, right? You know, but they want to be Spanish because to be less, you know, to not be Spanish is to be a dirty Mexican. That's basically the subject, and they're trying to avoid that racial categorization where they can. So I'll have to put that in a form, right? And then I'll have to put down my family is Canadian, Russian, Ukrainian, and Jewish. And this gets really, really complicated on the form too, because they oftentimes won't accept. Jews aren't allowed to declare themselves as a race on US forms. So so we're denied our racial status on forms. And you'll actually tell people say Jews aren't a race. You know, I'm like, tell that to the fucking Nazis, right? You know, like, you know, tell that to people who fucking send me death threats, right? You know, like I'm being kind of stalked by a guy named Kyle on Instagram right now. Every day he messages me and he talks about like how I'm going to be soap and stuff. Like we're going to render your Jewish body for soap jokes to me. He's not witty, which is depressing. But have we all had this experience where like you can't participate in the form at all, you know?
I generally prefer not to answer unless for some reason I'm like, maybe I'll have a better chance of getting accepted, which is so messed up, but that's just the way it is, you know? But most of the time, if there's an option of prefer not to answer for, you know, gender or ethnic backgrounds, I just choose that because I also think it's complicated because, you know, when you're filling out medical forms, it's like, tell me your family history. And then you have to explain, well, my family history is complicated because my adoptive family on my mom's side, you know, mostly passed away from diabetes. I'm not blood related, so I don't really have to worry about that. However, I do worry because I don't know any of my family history, but that's way too much to put in a tiny little box or the blank line that they give you. So then I feel like I'm basically like explaining a backstory to get to point 0. which is like, oh, so anyways, I'm basically here because I know absolutely nothing about my medical history. So can you just tell me if I have anything wrong with me? But yeah, I definitely feel like there's just not enough nuance in any sort of forms whatsoever, even including names. I was going to ask when James was talking about, names, like, so what if we did, what if there was a policy change that all adopted children had to go by their, birth given names? Where I maybe have thought about that, but then I was told that a social worker named me and not my birth mother. So why would I then want to go by some name that was given to me by some random stranger, that I have no relation to? But then I later was told that actually my birth mother did name me. So then that was also confusing. And then I realized, like, over the years, I just want to be called different names for various purposes. So if, like, I'm performing as some character, I just want to be that name. Or if I'm painting, I just want to be this name. And then I just constantly feel very disjointed, maybe on purpose. But yeah, I've been thinking, because I have some adoptee friends that have, taken on various portions of their birth name, but that also doesn't necessarily resonate with me either. So yeah, I'm not sure.
The part about the doctor's office, I also feel like, going back to the performance piece, it's really interesting how, I don't know if you've had this experience, that when you tell them you're adopted, suddenly it's like, oh, moving on to the next thing, like that's not relevant to my health in any way. There's nothing about this conversation we should extend and maybe search for information or relate it to addiction, depression, these other things that we know, suicide attempts. Yeah, I just find that really curious.
I think another thing, Kayla, with the names, and I've been all about names. Like I'm thinking that, like, the first issue of the magazine we're trying to put out is going to be about names. So I've been like, and it's something that I've been thinking about anyway. As someone, I feel you, because Park Ming Yu, that could have just be, I mean, why would they keep any part of my name? If that, it is confusing, because you hear people that have, their birth date's right, but it was a day off, it was 3 months off, it was the right name, but it was there just seems like no rhyme and reason to it. But for that reason, it's like sometimes, you go through these evolutions of your relationship with your Korean name, like, okay, that's my Korean name, I love it. And then you learn, it could be totally fake and made up. Okay, I don't really care about it anymore. But then you're like, but it's my fake name, I love it, I still love it. I don't know how I'm supposed to feel. My fake name, my fake birthplace, my fake birthday. They're the only, they're mine. They're my fake things. I like them. I don't know. But it's a conundrum sometimes. And then also the whole thing about, I'm also coming into a whole place where I'm just really starting to feel comfortable say, hey, I stand in my full Asianness, and it doesn't matter if I could speak a word of any Asian language. I could not like Asian food. Like those are incidentals that have nothing to do with one's Asianness per se, which is I'm learning, right? So part of me is like, I don't. It also wants to resist that impulse to be like, to be a real Korean, you got to have a Korean name. No, I don't. I could have whatever name I want. I would still have Korean blood in me. I would still be a Korean, by race, by ethnicity per se. So it's a real balance. I feel you. Like, where am I going with this name thing? I see what other people's are doing, and gosh, that's so cool what they're doing. I love that. I love the significance of all that. I'm in you. I'm with you. I don't know. It's still a mess.
I thought it was really interesting what Kayla said about not. I want to go back to this thing about like, you don't really put what your race, your identity down unless it might. You're like, I need this grant or something like that, right? I'm not calling you out. here. I did the opposite.
That's okay. You can call me out.
No, because I grew up in a really wealthy community, right? And I had a family that was nominally middle class. That like, you know, I don't think that my family, despite all terrifying economic hardships of my childhood, ever dipped below middle class in any real sense, right? And that's part of who I am. And I always felt like, well, I'm Native American, but I don't want to apply for like the Native American grant because like I have so much more economic privilege than most Native American people that have, and the Native American people I imagine really needs. So I've never applied for a lot of this stuff under that because I'm always like, and then I came to realize like by the time I'm like in my 30s and realizing that like, oh, my experience as an adoptee is very similar to the experience of say people who grew up in residential schools and other things that I view and understand are like inherently violent and traumatizing and malicious, right? That like, oh, wait, I thought I was lucky. Like I thought I was lucky. I thought I didn't need support or didn't deserve the same support that other people needed and stuff. I don't know how to, I've never really been able, now I'll sometimes say that, but I still don't apply for the, like, this is for Native people things, because it's like, well, there's gotta be some, I know what it's like. And like, you know, I work a lot in Navajo Nation. And so I know what it's gotta be like to be like an artist in like 22 in Navajo Nation. It's gotta be like a tiny, I'm at the top of the fucking art world. I know where I live. I know how close I am to the very top, right? I'm, you know, and I know what 22 in like Chinle, Arizona is like. And I want that person to have the grant still, you know. But I also kind of want to, you know, I also need the support, right? But the key thing here is like coming to terms with the fact that my situation is actually not as privileged as I thought it was. You know, that it's just different.
That's such a yeah, that I think these realizations are really, really complex. And I, again, am, you know, out of body experience, looking at myself, applying to things, not so much grants. I think it was like when I was applying to school. But yeah, I was like purposely, because my last name's pretty ambiguously Asian, but I was like including my middle name, which is Noriko, which is like pretty Japanese. And I was like, oh, you're doing it again, you know, performing as Japanese when you're actually Korean, but nobody, you know, yeah, it's just very interesting. Anybody that was just reading my application wouldn't know that I was Korean. So let's, you know, default to what I grew up raised as Japanese to like, I don't know, prove something. But yeah, that is interesting for you, Badly, to like come from thinking you're at a place of privilege when the inherent nature of adoption is pretty, at least the history of it is pretty violent.
What it made me think of immediately, Badly, and Kayla, was you said how it turned out it wasn't as privileged as you thought. It was just different. And that really struck me as, it wasn't better, was it? It was it wasn't a better life. It was a different life. You know, just this whole thing about the better life just needs to die. Just needs to die a horrible death that it deserves. You know, because who's to quantify that? You know, better requires a quantification, and no one is in a position, and no one has ever been in a position to say that. You know, the definition is, of course, it's based on economic, I would say economic, and, you know, they're going by things that, you know, they feel a child needs and things like that. But truly, I think the reason why we're here, and part of our larger conversation, is that the adoption industry and adoptive parents and the parents that are relinquishing us for, you know, the better life, the better opportunities, they still don't really have a grasp of what these children really require. They're still chasing after things that they think the children need. You know, I think the children do need, like I was 5 when I was adopted, between 5 and 6. A 5 and 6-year-old does not need to have their name changed. You know, maybe later when the 5 and 6-year-old is a 12 or 13-year-old, you can say, hey, you know, that could be a discussion, but it should not be the default. And it's being put forth as helping families, as helping the children. It's going to help them. I can say, you know, and even here's the thing. Where are you getting this information about? Is it helping the children? I mean, if you're asking a child, there's so many times I see things on social media where the adoptive parents are asking the kids, you know, hey, so what do you think about this adoption thing? I love it, Mom. Those kids are in no position to evaluate something as complex as adoption. My God. And for the adoptive parents to put them, and for society to put these children in that position of making a once and for a lifetime definitive sort of seal of approval. Oh, I'm 5 years old. Yeah, I love my life. Therefore, adoption itself is great and beyond reproach. It's so wrong, you know. So it's not a better life. It's a different life. And I think that the conversations we're having are really shedding light onto how different they are, quite different.
We've got a question coming in from the YouTube. It says, James, how did the name change feel as you were older when you were adopted?
Yeah, I'll try to answer briefly. At the time, of course, it's everything you think you want as a kid. I can honestly say that. I mean, when I was a kid, my dad used to use this stuff called, you know, my dad, he used to use this stuff called like Brill cream, which was big in the 50s. Like, you know, like it was like basically like oil for your hair. And it was like a white, greasy stuff. But that's how they got those really cool looking hairdos in the 50s. I was there sitting in the bathroom with him, putting that goop in my hair. I just wanted to look like my dad. I wanted to wear glasses like my dad. I wanted to do my hair exactly like my white dad. I wanted to be my white dad. I wanted to be my white country. It was everything that I was ever thought I ever wanted. But here's the thing. That's kind of what I was told that I ever thought I would ever want, you know. So at the time, I can say I was happy to be Jimmy. I was proud of that. I was happy with this. But I can say that when Jimmy grew up to 13 and from 13 to about 33, Jimmy didn't know who he was because Jimmy wasn't always Jimmy. And all of that took a while to catch up to Jimmy. And, you know, so that made it very difficult. And honestly, for me, looking back, I'm not going to blame my parents because that's what the adoption agencies were telling them. That's what the world was telling adoption agencies. That's what the churches were telling the world. That, you know, it's all of these go back to social, you know, norms and things. And it just comes down to it's a very imperialistic structure, you know, that better equals whiter, better equals more American, less whatever asshole country that we're actually from. That's what better equals in the American mind, you know. So, and I'm just done with it. I'm just done with it. And it took me a long, long time and a lot of pain to get to that point to where I actually realized what was going on. And it's kind of obvious, you know. I mean, you take a kid and you split their personalities, you're going to get a different kind of grown up out of that, you know. So I hope that answers it. I thought it was okay until it wasn't. It was okay until it wasn't, honestly. Yeah. I'm sorry, my wife is cooking chicken salad, sorry. They said, I want to know what's being chopped because it sounds so nice.
want to give people an option or an opportunity if they want to ask any questions. Or we're at 2:15 now, 2:15 California time and Arizona time, where James is calling in from. People are very excited about the chicken salad.
Same. If no one asks a question, I wanted to ask Badley a question.
Sure.
Badly, in our last talk, you talked about, and you kind of touched on it here, but that concept of a genetic island, and we kind of talked about that, when you go to the, Kayla talked about that, going to the doctor's office and this and that. I had never really thought of that as a conceptual, idea. And I was really, really interested in that and in hearing more from you.
Sure. I think that this is somewhat specific. Maybe this is like an intersectional issue for me, because for most of my, adult life, as defined as somebody who, for most of my adult life, it has been presumed, or it was presumed, that I was sterile. So in addition to being adopted and having no contact at birth, and having no contact whatsoever with my birth parents, and to some degree feeling that that my background was obfuscated in some kind of way, or there's something obfuscatory about that I'll never get to the bottom of. But also thinking that I was sterile made me think like, okay, I am somebody who I exist at the tail end of some weird of genetics. And I also felt uniquely American as a child, because I'm, again, when you're American and you're Native American and white passing, there's a weird uniquely American identity contained within that, right? I know that there are a lot of people who are like white and claim Native American ancestry, and I'm not extending this to that universe, if that makes sense. People who are claiming, if that makes sense. That's a really complicated thing. I've done some performance work about that to some degree, but I felt really American, right? I felt like this is what people are going to look like in the future, right? Dark-skinned people are going to get lighter, light-skinned people are going to get darker. We're all going to be this weird, beigey, yellow, brown people, right? And there'll still be some extremes smattered in for whatever the next couple centuries or something like that. But we're moving towards the future. I'm a science fiction person, so I'm like, the future is going to be the future, and then also because I thought I was shooting blanks as a sexual person, I presumed that I would never have children of my own, that I was the end of it. And because I occupy a third gender position, and because of that, or trans third gender position technically, I know very few people who are like me, right? So I just presumed it's like being an alien. It's like being on another planet. I don't think this is an experience that is universal to adoptees, right? I think it's universal to a subset of adoptees, right? And because of that, I don't have a demographic. I don't have a functional demographic as a person, and I think that makes people uncomfortable. I also think as a Jew, because that's part of my mix too, Jews make people uncomfortable because we are all the same race on a certain level. We're all racially Jewish, right? But we're not all racially the same race as defined by other people. And you can become Jewish, which is the only exemplar I know anything about, and where a person can actually change their race. I'm using that very, very loosely here, not to endorse transracialism as a fucking fantasy, right? But your racial category, and again, there were Jews historically in the Inquisition, in other pogroms during Nazi Germany, who were Jewish a little, or Jewish a lot, who were given the opportunity to stop being members of the Jewish race in order to not be killed. right? I think it's one of the reasons Jews make people uncomfortable is because we are like a human society that functions as evidence that race is an arbitrary characteristic, and that treats race oftentimes like an arbitrary characteristic. They're extremely Jewish right-wing groups that would absolutely say that what I'm saying is insane. I, as someone who's an anti-Zionist and a Jewish leftist, was engaged in an experience last year that was involving an alt-Zionist student at another institution. This is a very long story, but the subtext of everything she was saying was heading towards her telling me that as an adoptee, I wasn't Jewish because I'm not Jewish by maternal blood. She was on the edge of that, right? She was very young, and she's eaten a lot of bullshit. So I mean, I get it, right? But yeah, and I think so. I've always felt like I was a genetic island. I found out around 6 years ago now that, I'm gonna laugh because if I'm laughing, it's bad, right? Under circumstances that were absolutely painful, absolutely tragically, stupidly fucking painful, that I can't have children, and that changed. That was a fucking tailspin. That's all I can say. That was a crazy. The idea that I could theoretically have children, although I will all likelihood not have children, was a real shock. Let's just say that, and it changed my protocols on certain activities. It changed my life in a variety of ways. So I've just always grown up feeling that way. Yeah, I don't know how. I think a lot of adoptees feel that way to some degree. I want to say that I haven't talked a little bit about this. This deals a lot more with my gender than my race, but like I'm not supposed to be here. I should be dead, right? Like I shouldn't have survived high school, statistically speaking, right? And my experience as a young person who's trans, who's adopted, who has a variety of other intersectional things, is that by the time I was in high school, I wasn't just like dealing with suicidal ideation. That's stuff that's been part of my life since I was in preschool, right? Preschool level. That's preschool level basic chronic depression for me, right? That's fine. You don't need to worry about the chronically depressed. We've been dealing with that forever. We're gonna that's fine. But I was dealing with actual death threats. So I received at my home, in my school and other places, actual death threats. This is part of my life. This is part of why I'm good at code switching and part of why I'm good at this thing. I don't think that applies to anybody. I doubt that applies to anybody else in this group of people. It's a really unique experience. But like part of the reason that I don't trust people with I'm either all out, or the reason I don't trust people in certain circumstances with the fullness of my personhood or my identity is because I know what it is like to have people call your home to tell you they are going to come to your home to kill you as a child, right? I know what it's like to inform authorities about this and be told that nothing will be done. I know what it's like to carry a knife and a weapon to school, out of fear, not out of like, I'm fucking bad. Right. I went to high school. By the time I was like dropping out of high school, I was carrying a 2-foot length of Marine chain in my big ass jacket. And I had my hand gripped to that fucking thing anytime I was off campus. That's it. That's an absolutely legal weapon. That is like, I had like spikes set up the insets of not the toes of my boot, but the instep of the boot, and not the big long showy spikes, but the little ones. I was ready to have to fight for my fucking life, and I've had to fight for my life. I've had to do that since I was a child, and that experience of othering, I don't know anybody who's had that experience. This wasn't something that started in high school when I was like, the queerest human being that had ever lived, apparently, right? When I was in 5th grade and I was just a fat nerd playing Dungeons and Dragons. Like there was a 30-member club at my school that was the anti my birth name club. And when you've been held down by 7 or 8 people and been just beaten senseless, you know, and I've been in a lot of fights and I've won a lot of fights, and you know, I'm very good at fighting people, right? But when you can't fight, when you physically couldn't fight, you don't have an option to fight this fight. It's not a fight. And everybody you've ever known, because you go to elementary school, and so you're all in the same grade, it just watches it happen, right? That's when you know. So James, you opened this and you talked about Trump and stuff like that. Like the things that people fear like will happen if like America becomes super right wing, that's a basic function of my life. You know, that's a basic function of my life. I know a lot of people who talk about like fascism and like, and you know, and like what it would be like if like, you know, they come for you, or like right wing people are like in the streets with sticks and stuff like that. I've seen 10-year-olds do it, and I've done it to me. You know, as if I was separate from all other individuals. So that's, I mean, that's the long-winded version of like how you turn a person from feeling like they're part of a community into how you turn a person into somebody who never, who can't acknowledge with their own partner that they're, you know, that they've been, I mean, they've the same person for almost a decade. Like it's awkward to say that we're a family. You know, we could have had kids 5 years ago and I would still feel weird about that. Not that we're having kids, not happening. I just, anyways, I don't know what color smoke would have to come up for the gender reveal on that thing. Anyway, so that's where I'm going to end that. But but all those things are real, and that's how I was rendered like into my position. For me, again, this deals a lot with gender in a way that I don't think it deals with the other people. Yeah, and I don't know how people under the age of Gen X experience a lot of these things either, because like the world got a lot less violent after like 1996 or something.
Thanks, Badly. We've got a couple questions, but before we move on to the question, we want a confirmation on the pronouns that you prefer, Badly.
I prefer a gender neutral pronoun. Yeah. I'm also the asshole who had briefly attempted at age 7 to use a gender neutral plural pronoun, and would, as somebody who identifies as a hardcore fan of Lynn Margulis and Donna Haraway, to disacknowledge my individualism by using a plural pronoun. But when you refer to yourself as we, it has a weird, it doesn't work. It's not a good move. It's not a it does not radiate what you think it radiates to other people. But I'm also comfortable with that. Yeah, I went through, I also know how masculine I appear to people. Growing up fighting makes you, you know, trust me, a lot more masculine. I know what my testosterone count is right now. So I know, yeah, amongst other hormonal counts. So I don't mind I don't really care that much about it. I think people who are a little too sweaty about pronouns are like, you know, don't be too sweaty about that, you know? I just think that's the best way to say it.
Thank you. One of the questions that was asked of all of you is, do you prioritize authenticity over code switching?
I'll say that traditionally and historically, yes. But I also realize that if I'm to try to have a conversation with other people, I'm trying to find some way where I'm trying to find a balance between speaking in a way that they can understand and yet being authentic. I'm still trying to find that balance right now, but it's something I'm working on.
I would say that it's so hard to tell when you're really authentic sometimes, but I try to be present. That's what my aim is, to really be present with whoever I'm with who they are and how I'm feeling at the time. And that's the best way for me at the moment, to tap into something that goes in the right direction in terms of feeling validated and being able to validate other people.
I feel that my code switching is my authenticity in a lot of ways. Yeah. And I don't like the term nature, like there's an essential nature anywhere. and I'm not too keen on the concept of authenticity. You know, I think all of us who are, you know, and I think there are other people in this group have very specific experiences as Asian people. The concept of like, what's authentic Asian food comes up a lot. It's like, is it any food that's being eaten by an Asian person? You know, like whatever, you know, it's like, you know, because like white people really care what authentic Asian food is, right? A lot of the time in a different way than maybe, I don't know, I'm speaking out of my territory here, but authenticity is like really double-edged.
I feel like that's complicated because I feel like this is why I keep bringing up the need to retreat, because I really I feel authentic when I'm not having to speak to anyone. And I can go into my own world, and I feel like I've always done this since I was a child. Kind of escape into some fantasy world of writing or whatever I was doing creatively. But I think in terms of code switching, sometimes I don't make that choice. The other person makes that choice for me. And I don't like that. I don't like when I'm forced into it. So if someone's coming at me asking where I'm from or why I have no accent, or, you know, why, whatever, how long have I been here? No, but really, how long? Oh, you know, I met a Korean person once, you know, oh, well, you know, I fought in the Vietnam War. I'm like, what does that have to do with, you know, me existing right now? First of all, these are two different countries. Anyways, that's neither here nor there. Now you've forced me into code switching, and I don't like it. So I don't know if that's, you know, what anyone wants to hear, but I don't think that's cool to be up against a wall.
Yeah, I think it's just that, you know, being present, and I think Badly brings up a point. Just because we're performing doesn't necessarily mean we're not being authentic. There's times when we're totally authentic through that mask, you know, and there's times when those masks facilitate authenticity in many situations that Badly brought up. And and I guess it just really is learning. But I guess it's, you know, what I'm here with Kayla is like, you wanna really be empowered with the choice of how you show up and not be forced to show up in a certain way that conforms to somebody else's thing. And I think that's for me too. And that's what authenticity means for me, is that I'm choosing who I am, and who I am and who I choose to show to the world may be different, and that's still authentic, you know, but it's just, if I have the choice, and if it's just something put on or expected or mandated or compelled, then it just starts to feel like, you know, other things. And I get it, and I'm not trying to equate any, like, because Badly, what you know, you're talking about having experienced those traumas, and, you know, those invisibilities are beyond, I mean, what society is literally beyond anything. And so I have a ton of privilege to, tons to work through, and learning about it all. But honestly, the best is when you see other people being authentic, and I think that's when they're, you know, it's an invitation. It's an invitation. I don't know. I still haven't. I feel like I was playing a role for so long that authenticity is something I'm very attracted to. It's still something that I see as a need. But you're right. A lot of the things. I mean, I'm old enough to realize that a lot of the things that I thought I needed, after I sort of got them, I said, "Oh God, I didn't need that," you know. And maybe this is one of those too, and I'll figure it out, you know. So we'll see.
Yeah. So interesting to think about authenticity and code switching. I like this idea of code switching being authentic. I think that resonates with me as an adoptee. So I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So it's 2:34 here on the West Coast. I know there were a bunch of other questions in the chat that we didn't get to, unfortunately. But there's one that I think you guys could answer really quickly. And this was actually asked earlier on too, but I missed it, were any of you raised with other foster kids or birth siblings? And I think a couple of you touched on it, but if you could just answer that question, and then we'll probably have to say goodbye, and any last things you would like to say, and then we'll say goodbye.
I wouldn't say raised because I was very young, but yeah, I had 3 foster siblings when I was between 5 and 8, and my memory is really vague. My memory is like that I have no memory of speaking to any of them. I just don't really remember interacting with them. I feel like I just decided they weren't there in some way. I don't know why, but yeah.
No foster kids, just, a lot of other adopted siblings, and then my parents' biological siblings as well. So 9 of us in our family of 11.
No, but I remember distinctly asking every year when I was a child, my parents asked me what I wanted for my birthday, and I would request a sibling. I mean, like they did it once, right? And I actually remember I had a bunk bed. I had an aspirational bunk bed as a child. So yeah, but no.
That's very endearing to ask every year. I grew up with one adopted sister who is 3 years younger than me. And I imagine when I was in the orphanage early on, there was a lot of other, I don't know, I was told there was a couple dozen other children, but obviously I was too young to remember.
Well, thank you, Marie and James and Badley and Kayla. This has been a really wonderful conversation. Thank you for your candor. Thank you for sharing everything. Unless anybody has any final thoughts. No. Okay.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, just thank you for this
Bringing
beautiful
us together.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Really fun. Thanks everyone for joining on YouTube.
Yeah, thank you everyone on YouTube. Let's say goodbye to YouTube. Bye, YouTube.
Bye.